Good afternoon. In a crisis, the last thing anyone should worry about is how they'll make rent or put food on the table. When COVID-19 hit Canada, we saw massive gaps in the programs that were supposed to be there to support all Canadian workers. Many were left behind, especially gig economy workers. 1.7 million Canadians work in the gig economy. We're talking about everyone from truckers to graphic designers, from warehouse workers to delivery drivers, anyone working on a contract or an on-call basis. For some, it's their main source of income, and for many others, it helps them make ends meet or save for the future. But when the pandemic hit, the safety net that every other Canadian worker could count on in tough times, it wasn't there for these workers or their families. They don't qualify for employment insurance under the current rules. They don't have the insurable hours and contributions of a typical employee. Put simply, the federal government failed them. Quand la pandémie a frappé, le filet de sécurité dont les travailleurs à la demande ont besoin dans les moments difficiles n'était pas là pour eux et leurs familles. Avec les règles actuelles, les travailleurs à la demande n'ont pas droit à l'assurance emploi. Ils n'ont pas les heures assurables ou les cotisations des employés typiques. C'est simple, le gouvernement fédéral les laisse tomber. The system has to change. Canada's recovery plan will provide security for gig economy workers. We believe it's time for gig economy companies to give their workers the protection they need. Our plan will require companies with gig economy workers to make contributions equivalent to CPP and EI premiums into a new, portable employee savings account every time they pay their workers. Il est temps que les entreprises donnent aux travailleurs à la demande la protection dont ils ont besoin. Notre plan va exiger que les entreprises qui ont des travailleurs à la demande fassent des contributions équivalentes aux cotisations au régime de pension du Canada et à l'assurance emploi. Les entreprises vont le faire dans de nouveaux comptes d'épargne et chaque fois qu'elles paient leurs travailleurs. Funds in the employee savings account will grow tax-free and can be withdrawn by the worker when they need it. Gig economy workers shouldn't be left behind when a crisis hits. We will make sure the necessary support is there for Canada's gig economy workers, just as they are for any other Canadian worker. Only Canada's Conservatives have a plan to secure the future for all Canadian workers. On va agir pour que les travailleurs à la demande aient le soutien nécessaire, comme tous les autres travailleurs canadiens. Seuls les conservateurs du Canada ont un plan pour agir pour l'avenir des travailleurs canadiens. Avant de prendre des questions, je veux prendre quelques minutes pour m'adresser aux Québécois et aux Québécoises. Ce matin, le Premier ministre Legault a dévoilé les priorités du Québec pour la campagne fédérale. Je tiens à le remercier et l'assurer de ma collaboration pour atteindre ces priorités. Un gouvernement conservateur va mettre fin au paternalisme et aux intrusions de Justin Trudeau. Notre approche va être un fédéralisme de partenariat. C'est l'un des principaux engagements que j'ai fait dans mon contrat avec les Québécois et les Québécoises. Un gouvernement conservateur va augmenter les transferts en santé dans une manière stable, prévisible et sans condition, d'un minimum de 6 % par année. On va donner plus de pouvoir en immigration, donc en matière de réunification familiale. On va s'entendre pour un rapport d'impôt unique pour le Québec, tout en conservant les emplois en région. Et comme j'ai dit en septembre dernier, on va travailler ensemble pour faire appliquer la loi 101 aux entreprises à charte fédérale. On va aussi encadrer le pouvoir fédéral de dépenser et on ne va pas intervenir dans les contestations juridiques de la loi sur la laïcité. En matière du logement et de l'environnement, un gouvernement conservateur va être ouvert à des nouvelles ententes pour mieux répondre aux ambitions du Québec. Finalement, on va être un partenaire pour développer et moderniser l'ensemble des infrastructures québécoises avec des programmes plus flexibles et on va financer le troisième lien Québec-Lévis à hauteur de 40 %. Nous sommes le seul parti en faveur de ce projet. Nous, les conservateurs, sommes le seul parti qui peut remplacer Justin Trudeau. Les Québécois et les Québécoises méritent un gouvernement éthique et prêt d'agir sur leurs priorités. C'est ça, le fédéralisme de partenariat. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. I'm ready for your questions.
We will now be taking questions. Allons maintenant prendre les questions.
Bonjour Boris Proulx du Devoir. J'aimerais savoir, M. O'Toole, si vous ne comptez pas aller de l'avant avec le programme fédéral en garderie, allez-vous quand même maintenir l'entente de 6 milliards avec le Québec, tel qu'a été signé par le gouvernement Trudeau?
Avec notre plan, on va aider toutes les familles québécoises, toutes les familles canadiennes immédiatement et on va aider les familles à faible revenu, mais en même temps, on doit respecter les chambres des compétences des provinces, mais on a un programme prêt et ça serait mon approche. Respect pour les chambres des compétences, mais je vais agir pour les familles.
Sans égard au reste de votre programme, seulement sur le 6 milliards pour l'entente avec le Québec sur les garderies, oui ou non, le Québec peut s'attendre à ce qu'un gouvernement O'Toole respecte cette entente?
Comme j'ai dit, je vais respecter les chambres des compétences. La garderie au Québec, c'est un programme qui fonctionne très bien il y a 20 ans. Je vais assister les familles québécoises directement, toutes les familles. Et je vais travailler avec la province sur la situation en santé et sur les priorités pour les Québécois et Québécoises. C'est dans notre plateforme, notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada, et c'est aussi dans mon contrat avec les Québécois et les Québécoises.
Prochaine question.
Oui, bonjour, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Sur la question des transferts en santé, parce que c'est aussi une demande de M. Legault ce matin, vous vous engagez à augmenter les transferts de 6 % par année. M. Legault a dit c'est très bien, 6 % par année, mais nous, on veut en plus une augmentation en ce moment de 28 milliards là, pour que le fédéral couvre 35 % des dépenses en santé. Est-ce que vous vous engagez aussi, en plus de votre 6 % par année, d'augmenter immédiatement les transferts de 28 milliards de dollars?
Comme j'ai dit dans une conversation avec le Premier ministre Legault, je vais avoir une réunion avec tous les premiers ministres dans mes premiers 100 jours comme Premier ministre. Je vais être un partenaire avec toutes les provinces. Et avec les transferts en santé, je vais augmenter les transferts avec un minimum de 6 % minimum, mais sans condition. Et c'est très important de respecter les chambres des compétences.
Sur la question de l'immigration maintenant, M. Legault souhaite que la réunification familiale se soit décidée par Québec. Est-ce que oui ou non, vous êtes prêt à laisser ce champ de compétences pour la réunification familiale à Québec?
C'est une question très importante. C'est pourquoi c'est un enjeu dans mon contrat avec les Québécois et les Québécoises. Je vais donner plus de pouvoir en immigration, incluant la réunification familiale. Il y a des défis sur le terrain au Québec maintenant, la pénurie de main-d'œuvre, et c'est très important de respecter le français aussi avec notre système d'immigration. Et c'est pourquoi je vais travailler en étroite collaboration, mais je vais donner plus d'autonomie sur l'immigration, incluant la réunification familiale.
Next question.
Good afternoon. Janice McGregor from CBC News. In the past, Conservatives have derided things like CPP premium increases, EI premium increases as payroll tax hikes that kill jobs, that burden entrepreneurs, that provide a drag on the economy at a time when it needs to grow. Why has your party had such a change of heart on this, and why is it going to add this burden to a section of the economy that hasn't had to carry it up to this point and has provided a lot of growth as a result?
Because the Conservative Party is going to stand up for all workers. And this is a new part of our economy. The gig economy didn't exist years ago when EI and other programs were rolled out. And that's why 1.7 million Canadians were missed in a crisis. What we're creating today with the portable employee savings account is protection for those workers. And we will act to make sure that the programs apply and meet the unique needs of the gig economy. We're willing to act to stand up for all workers.
On the subject of this new employee savings account scheme, if I understand you correctly, this is a new kind of aspect of bureaucracy that you're piling on to an employment insurance system that's already been derided as extremely complicated and ineffective. I'm wondering why the Conservative government would take the approach of adding more complications and aspects to EI instead of coming out for Canadians with a comprehensive vision for meaningful EI reform, which people have been asking for a very long time.
This is an innovative new benefit for an innovative new part of our economy, the gig economy. Those workers are left out completely now with this new employee savings account that is portable. It gives them the flexibility to make payments to CPP themselves, gives them flexibility to have an account if there's a crisis, if there's a prolonged economic recession. We need to meet the needs of the new economy and make sure we stand up for all working Canadians. That's what Canada's recovery plan is all about, getting people back to work, securing jobs and opportunity in all parts of our economy, all parts of our country, including the gig economy.
Next question.
Mr. O'Toole, Michael Couture with Global National. With the climate summit in Glasgow just 2 months away, governments are being called upon to adopt more ambitious climate targets if there's going to be any hope of keeping global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees. Critics of the Conservative plan say it's overly complicated and more restrictive than Liberals' carbon tax, and it won't go far enough to reduce emissions to avoid that 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. How do you respond to that?
I'll respond with our plan. We put our plan out for climate change in April because we wanted to show Canadians that Conservatives have a plan to meet our Paris targets, to get our emissions down, but to get people back to work. Canada's recovery plan is about securing jobs, securing our economy, and securing our environment. This is an issue that's important to me, as I've said, not just as a politician, but as a parent. So we worked hard to have a plan that will meet our Paris reduction targets, but get people back to work. And that's what our country needs. If we don't have a strong economy, we can't tackle challenges like climate change and the other challenges facing our country.
In the same vein, I just want to follow up with the International Energy Agency calling for no more oil and gas infrastructure to be built. Construction of TMX pipeline extension is now underway. Will you commit to stopping TMX, and what about other future pipelines? Would you commit to not building any future pipelines?
We need to get our economy back on track. People working, including in Western Canada, including in energy and natural resources, and Canadian resources are the world leaders in environmental stewardship. There are many net zero by 2050 plans in Canada's resource sector. We have highest standards of human rights, transparency, Indigenous partnership and participation. We should be proud of what we do in Canada. We can get our emissions down while we also get people back to work. That's exactly what Canada's recovery plan is all about, and it's why I'm inviting Canadians, check out our plan. Our country needs a plan, it needs leadership.
Next question.
Good afternoon, Mr. O'Toole. Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. Canada has already submitted its higher targets for greenhouse gas reductions by 2030. We're now looking, or the goal is 40 to 45%. If you become Prime Minister, are you committed to meeting that goal?
As I've said, we launched our climate change plan in April. It's an ambitious and innovative plan that will meet our Paris targets, but get people back to work, get our economy moving forward again. We've been transparent, and we've worked with a leading third party to make sure that people can see our plan to reduce emissions, and we're serious about it. But Mr. Trudeau, this is another example, has never made a target as Prime Minister. Never. He's never made a deficit target. He hasn't made his target on safe drinking water. He hasn't lived up to government transparent by default. The sunny ways language of Mr. Trudeau, people have seen after 6 years. They're let down time after time after time. We have a plan. We can tackle climate change and get the country back to work, and that's exactly what we will do.
I would like you to clarify first, Mr. O'Toole, your plan says 30%. That is our existing Paris target. But the way the Paris Agreement works is every 5 years or so, we're supposed to ramp up that ambition. So are you committed that if you become Prime Minister, you will meet Canada's new target of between 40 to 45% or your existing 30%?
We will meet Canada's Paris targets. And it's time to be honest with Canadians. We need a real plan to meet those targets, and that is exactly what I launched in April. Mr. Trudeau says one thing and does nothing, not just on climate change, literally on every subject. We've put forward in Canada's recovery plan an ambitious set of environmental commitments that are important, but it's equally important to get this country back to work, to get people working. If we don't have a strong economy, which is happening under Mr. Trudeau, runaway inflation, a cost of living crisis, jobs and investment leaving our country, if we don't unite our country, get it working again, we can't tackle climate change and have the ambition that Canada wants to have to meet those Paris targets. So we will meet our targets and we'll get this country back to work.
Next question.
Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. I'd like to ask you a question about Afghanistan, sir. We've heard you criticize Justin Trudeau on this, but you've also said that you would show leadership, but at the same time allow the Army to make its operational decisions. But there are certain decisions that, as Prime Minister, you would need to make for our troops on the ground. You've criticized Mr. Trudeau, but I really do think that Canadians need to hear what you would make in terms of decisions for operational measures in Afghanistan that could put troops in danger. Could you please let us know what your plan would be in this scenario right now?
Well, Kevin, like all Canadians this morning, watching explosions, watching death and destruction in Afghanistan is heartbreaking. Women and girls will once again be subjected to a brutal Taliban regime. There's no rule of law, no respect for rights. It's a travesty. And that's why, literally for months, and in some cases for years, we've been pushing the government to act. Get people out that are at risk, work with our allies to help people that are at risk or displaced. We need to act as a country to respond alongside our allies and to stand up for people that are at risk. Mr. Trudeau has wasted months with inaction and has now put us into an election when the situation has been in chaos. It's heartbreaking, and that's another reason why we need leadership, why we need a government that will be ready to represent our interests at home and abroad. La situation sur le terrain en Afghanistan est très, très triste. Mes pensées sont avec les femmes et les filles là-bas. C'est une situation horrible. Et malheureusement, M. Trudeau a manqué l'opportunité d'agir sur la situation et d'agir sur les réfugiés en danger à cause de leur appui pour notre pays. Je vais agir comme Premier ministre. Et il y a 6 mois, j'ai proposé un plan d'action pour le Premier ministre, mais malheureusement, comme d'habitude, il était lent. Et maintenant, nous sommes en pleine élection à cause de M. Trudeau.
But we've been hearing the same answer from you for days, sir. What are the specific actions that you would take? Would you extend Canada's mission on the ground past August 31st? Would you do actions similar to the French troops that went outside of the protected zone from the airport to find people on the ground in Taliban-controlled zones of Kabul? What other actions would you take as Prime Minister? And please be specific.
As I've said, the situation is heartbreaking, and that's why we need action. That's why last month I wrote the Prime Minister directly on this. We were calling for action to get people out, to work with our allies. We've been demanding this for months, and in some cases, years. The Trudeau government has failed to act, and they have abandoned people on the ground in Afghanistan. That's not Canada's way. That's not the Canada of Vimy Ridge and Juno Beach. That's not the Canada that fought apartheid. That's not the Canada that's always been a player alongside our allies and alongside our values. I will act. And we would have gotten people out before the chaos erupted. But like most issues, Mr. Trudeau is late, no leadership, and Canadians deserve a government that will be ahead of challenges, and that's what Canada's Conservatives will offer.
Next question.
Good afternoon, Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. Following on Afghanistan, yesterday you said if you were Prime Minister, you would still find a way to get everybody who worked with Canada's missions out. How would you do that?
As I've said, watching the situation on the ground, including today, suicide bombings, some of our allies have soldiers that are injured. It's a horrific circumstance.
Mr. O'Toole,
that's why for
voters
6
don't want
months,
to hear about horrific
that window
circumstances. They
to
want to know
act,
what your plan would be.
Question.
that window to act for 6 months was missed by Mr. Trudeau. I wrote him a month ago to act. We've been asking for several years to try and get people that were at risk because of their help for Canada. And as Prime Minister, I will act. I will stand up for our interests at home and help get the country back on its feet after COVID-19. And I think the world would like to see a serious and responsible Canada back on the world stage.
What is the point of touting your work in the forces if that history in the forces gives you no ideas now for what to do?
That's a great question, because it really was military families and veterans that I've worked with for many months, and in some cases years, to try and help people that were left behind, translators, for example. It was that military network, nonprofit groups that were saying our people on the ground there are at risk. And when Mr. Biden announced a pullout date, we knew that there was a short timeline to act, and Mr. Trudeau did not act, even though many people were calling for action. Canadians deserve a government that will act, a government that will lead. The situation on the ground is horrible to watch, and Canadians need to know that a Conservative government will always stand up for our interests here at home and around the world alongside our allies.
Next question. Next question, please.
Andrew Lawton, True North. Monday will mark 3 months since Justin Trudeau had ordered the flags at Government of Canada buildings nationwide to be lowered to half-mast after the announcement of unmarked graves at the Kamloops Residential School. If you were Prime Minister, would those flags be down or upright now? And more broadly, what do you think of this idea of an indefinite period of mourning, which is what we have now with these flags at half-mast, in the government's words, until further notice?
After the terrible situation of the discovery at the former residential school site in Kamloops, I offered bipartisan support for the Prime Minister to move immediately on Truth and Reconciliation calls to action 71 to 76 that deal directly with former residential school sites and missing children. We as Canadians owe it to the families and to First Nations to provide a path to healing. It's not a time to tear down Canada. It's a time to recommit to build it to be the country we know it can be. And reconciliation is very important and should be important to all Canadians. I think to recommit to Canada, you have to be proud of Canada. You can't cancel the one day a year that you commit to your country. You need to use that day to recommit to the path of reconciliation. So I've been talking to Indigenous leaders since I became opposition leader. Reconciliation will be important for me, as will be pride in Canada, building it up, making it more opportunity for more people, including Indigenous peoples. That will be my priority, and I do think we should be proud to put our flag back up.
This will be the last follow-up question.
Your platform calls for the establishment of a permanent task force to address foreign interference in Canada's elections. You say in the platform that Justin Trudeau's efforts to safeguard against this ended after the 2019 election. Do you think that this election is at risk of foreign interference, and if so, how?
I do think there's risks of foreign interference, particularly with what we've seen happen in other democracies, allies of Canada. We've seen interference from bad actors, and I feel that Mr. Trudeau hasn't been doing enough in this situation. it's also a horrific situation for Chinese Canadians who've been subject to unfair anti-Asian intolerance and hate. They also have the challenge of being observed and being tracked by agents of the Communist Party of China. So we need to be serious and protect our institutions, protect our democracy. And this is another thing that I think Mr. Trudeau has not taken seriously, yet he launched a pandemic election when there's fires in BC, the Delta variant, the situation in Afghanistan. He's putting his own interests ahead of the national interests. And that's one of the reasons why I think our country deserves change.
It will be all for today. Ce sera tout pour aujourd'hui. Merci. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.